the aftermath of a long-term event. And you have to realize in this scenario, you are on your own. So there's no help coming. People are capable of very heinous things. People have this incredible inability to take themselves out of the world that they exist in, where nobody's trying to kill you every moment of every day. And they try and build a plan of action for that world. When you're sitting there and you're looking at your 6-year-old daughter, your child's starving to death, what wouldn't you do for food for your child? At the end of the day, you don't know what you're capable of. The psychological toll on the human psyche, that starvation, desperation, not knowing whether you're going to live or die, is going to play on people. Most of our institutions that provide our trust and our foundation of life, they're going to be non-existent. From the Holodomor, from the Chinese famine, from Bosnia, from the Bengal famine, it'll be a biblical scale famine that's never been seen in world history. This is a weapon delivery system that, again, American people aren't aware of. These type of delivery systems could be all throughout our country at this point. We just don't know.
Maybe you could give us a little bit of an insight from your perspective, what you see this potential grid down world looking like, should it ever go there?
Sure. So that is, I would say that's probably my highest area of expertise is that one particular topic. You know, what does this actually look like after fact? That's what I've delved a lot of my time into. I'm a former SEER instructor, military SEER instructor, stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. I have gone through very severe training that had to do with hunger, depressant, taking food away from you. Our first trip in Washington State was 21 days in 6 feet of snow in January. It was extremely cold. And for a group of 8 guys during my training, they gave us a box of vegetables and a goat. And that was gone by like the 10th day. I was extremely peak physical condition back then. And I lost like 15 pounds that trip. So I've experienced to a limited degree the psychological effects of hunger. And I talk about that in my one report here. So the aftermath of a long-term event. So that's real key here to discuss. Okay. So a lot of preparedness community, they really focus on shorter term events. They really focus on your hurricanes, your tornadoes, your even a short-term grid down event or a financial collapse or something that happens slowly over time, or a pandemic that builds, that allows you to get to the store at the last minute. You can make decisions. You can do this, do that. EMP. So we're talking about a situation that happens instantly. You don't have any more prior planning. It happens now, and you have to move, right? And we're talking about an event that lasts, we just discussed, we're talking minimum 2 years, right? So there's no help coming. I don't know how many kind of preparedness fiction books I've started. I haven't read many of them because I have a hard time getting through them. There's always a government, there's always somebody coming to help at some point. And you have to realize in this scenario, you are on your own. So this mindset of just focusing on the first, we'll call it the first 2 to 3 weeks of a event. In those scenarios, yes, working together for food, working together for security, pulling resources. These things all make sense for a short-term event when it's going to end. You can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and life's going to get back to some semblance of normal shortly, right? Those decisions, those ideas, those philosophies are so grounded in the kind of the preparedness community. They've been there. I love Mel Tappan from the 70s. You know, there's guys that have been writing about preparedness for many, many generations. They haven't wrapped their mind around the after effects of a similar event today. The life skills of the people that live today, the ability to be self-reliant today, they're almost non-existent. So what we're looking at is in a nationwide grid down event. I usually say by the end of day one, people are still confused. In the big cities, you're probably going to see looting and rioting. It's mainly going to be TVs and sneakers the first night, right? But by day 2, we're talking no phone, no TV, no internet, no banking, no toilets, no heat, AC, no interstate trucking, no gas pumps, no food. Most of your big cities, you live no 911, no hospitals. Most of your big cities, the street lights are going to go down. So you're going to have with an EMP, you're going to lose a certain percentage of cars, whether that be 15% or 30%. That alone in itself is enough to gridlock traffic in most cities. Everything just kind of stops where it is. The Congressional EMP Commission calls this a continental time machine. So by day 2, we're talking a big event. People are going to realize their cell phones don't work. The internet doesn't work. You know, they're not getting any news from the outside world of what's happening outside. So by day 2, there's the panic, especially in the cities. So just a caveat, a lot of times people are like, oh, we're the country, you know, a country boy can't survive. I can fish, you know, I can run a trout line. Love it. Got it. But they're just as reliant as the big cities are on this infrastructure. It just may take, they're going to be, in my opinion, 3 or 4 days behind the curve of the big cities, right? Where country people, a lot of times they think, well, it'll be months before it gets that bad here, but we'll get back to that. So we're talking about within day 2, people start panicking. Grocery stores are going to be looted day 2, day 3. By day 3, all your hospitals will have run out of backup diesel power. They'll have run out of supplies. There's going to be a lot of death and destruction and violence, and the hospitals are going to be overwhelmed. We talked about not being able to get around. Your police officers, I mean, I've done surveys of police officers before. I mean, we talked about this, and you know, I had conversations with, you know, some NYPD guys, and like, we're going to be there, and doesn't matter what happens, you know, 9/11 doesn't matter what happens, we're going to be there. But by day 2 or day 3, they have no radios. There's no 911 systems. Their jails don't function. The lights in their police precinct don't work, or the jails, they're not going to be able to get around in their cars because of gridlock traffic. And that's assuming their newer cars even work.
And
where would they go?
They're also going to be worried about their families, and I think that's what a lot of people forget, is that you're not going to leave your family to fend for themselves when you know there's lawlessness just to go to work, right? And this is one of the things I was surprised about with the pandemic. Fortunately, it never got this bad, but it could get so bad that people just don't go to work because they're worried about the human threat element.
That's exactly right. That's right where I said at that point, day 2. Police officers, firefighters, there's no water in the pumps and the pipes for the firefighters even fight a fire if there was one. They couldn't get their trucks there. Policemen, firefighters, hospital workers, the people that keep our lights on, or the people that fix things, they're going to go home. It's human nature. They have families, they have loved ones. They're going to home. They're going to see the violence. They're going to see the escalation and rioting and looting. They're going to go home to be with and protect their loved ones. So this is something that, again, a lot of people think it's going to be like, oh, that's down the road, but you're absolutely right. Same thing with the pandemic. We had I want to be careful what words we are, so we don't get, you know, tagged on YouTube
we're okay
here.
With
but
that word now.
Okay, so we had that situation a couple of years ago.
Sure.
People need to realize that had a 0.003% death rate. I'm not minimizing it. You know, I know people that got very sick and died, so I'm not minimizing it, but I'm saying as far as population count goes, it didn't kill a lot of people, and the people that did die were typically elderly people. That same lab had viruses with 20 to 40% death rate, not 0.003, but 20 to 40%. Yeah, the government ain't gonna have to shut nothing down if something like that, a bioweapon or one of those other viruses, or even a naturally occurring H5N1 or something like that happens in nature. It'll shut down itself. People are going to stop going to work. Truckers are going to stop driving across the country to deliver goods. So a future pandemic, a very serious financial collapse, you know, I'm talking the extremist of extreme type financial collapse could get us there at some point as well as things start to shut down. So by day 3, we're talking about most of our institutions that provide our trust and our foundation of life. They're going to be non-existent. You already don't have power. You're septic in your house. So a lot of people don't understand how septic systems work in big cities. If you're at a lower elevation of your city, everyone above you is still flushing their toilet. The septic facility is broken. A lot of times they open up reservoirs and it just starts kind of going out into whatever river you're next to. So a lot of people talk about going to get water from the river, but a lot of septic facilities and factories and are going to be dumping stuff into the rivers at that point because they don't have a choice. But you can see lower elevation cities septic backing up into your house through your pipes, through your toilet, through your sinks, unless you have that 10-foot rod to go out to your street and shut it off at the street, you're not going to be able to stop it. There's going to be methane in your house. You're not going to be able to live there. People are going to be starting fires in their house if this is winter to stay warm. They'll bring a charcoal grill in to try and heat their living room up for their kids to sleep. Their house is going to catch fire. I lived in Pittsburgh for a bunch of years. It's an older city, row houses upon row houses in a lot of areas, old, crusty old wood houses. You start a couple blocks on fire, half the city could burn down without firefighters to stop this. We're scratching the surface here, Nate. There's so many things to consider, and we're just talking the first week. So that is where a lot of people kind of stop, right? Their thought process stops. So the two most important things to understand in this scenario are the threats. What is the big threat? You can find water unless you're in southern Arizona or New Mexico, you can procure water. You can find water. What do you need? You need food, shelter, water. We can go down that list.
Medicine,
however many days this, right? So water is not a big one. Shelter, you can pitch a tent. You can get out of the elements. If you have personal protection with firearms, you can protect your personal body with firearms. Food and other people are going to be your biggest threats. The more people that you're around in this type of scenario, the bigger chance that you're not going to make it through this scenario. But food is one that's often overlooked. So the average person eats 2,000 pounds of food a year. That's a metric ton of food per year. Through my consulting company, we haven't really discussed this, but I have a consulting company. I've worked with over 500 high net worth individuals, a certain list of people on the Fortune 500, and I do a lot of analysis of existing survival retreats as well, and make recommendations on off-grid power and bunkers and tunnel networks and security and all that stuff. The number one issue I see in the preparedness community is lack of food. People will buy a 3-month food package. They'll buy a 6-month, or some will buy a 1-year food plan. First off, they don't realize that on average, most of those food plans from those companies are extremely disingenuous. You're getting peanut butter and you're getting a lot of sugary orange drink. On average, when I averaged this years ago, they were getting about 800 calories a day. And if you think 800 calories a day is going to keep you alive, read the Minnesota Starvation Experiment. On average, people have about a fourth of the food that they think they have, the calories to begin with. More people are going to show up to their location because a lot of people don't keep their mouth shut about what they've got going on, right? They're going to have coworkers and the second cousins and people showing up to eat their food.
I think I'm kind of guilty of that one. I've resigned to the fact that everybody knows who I am. I'm going to have to get a disguise going here, like, what's his name, Prigozhin, and all his different masks or something.
Yeah, you just need to make sure you're somewhere else when they show up. That's my opinion. Yeah. Because, so again, this is, we're getting off topic, we're veering, but that's a kind of a preparedness fiction fantasy, is that it's going to be like The Walking Dead and the zombie apocalypse, and there's going to be these nameless, faceless people that are storming your castle, and you're going to blow all their heads off and, not bury the bodies, and you're going to sleep. What's most likely to happen is the people that are going to be coming for your food are going to be people you know and you love, or that it's going to be coworkers and friends and family and extended family that are going to come for your food. And yes, you can bring, empathy, love, take care of your neighbor. But yeah, sure, bring everybody in. That 6-month food plan, which was actually only 2 months, now instead of a family of 5, you've got 25 people. You're out of food in a week. You're never going to make it to your first harvest season, even if you intended to grow your own food. There's just a lot of misunderstanding about the effects of food. So what happened is at the end of the Electromagnetic Defense Task Force that I was part of, General Quas and some of the leadership, they asked me to write a white paper, a report on starvation. And so I wrote, it's called Grid Down, Death of a Nation, the Psychology and Physiology of Human Desperation, Starvation, and Living Without Rule of Law in a Long-Term Event. So that's a mouthful. Grid Down, Death of a Nation. You can buy a paperback copy on Amazon, but I want this to get as far. I give it away for free. You can get it at the emptaskforce.us, our website. You can get it at my website, griddownconsulting.com, under the research tab. And I put this report together. Like I said, it's a fairly long report, but it went through all the studies of psychology and physiology and how starvation affects people. I've got 30 to 40 pages of firsthand accounts of people who lived through these events, from the Holodomor, from the Chinese famine, from Bosnia, from the Bengal famine, from the Warsaw Ghetto. It's important that the preparedness community understand how this is going to affect the average psychic, because everyone's planning for these first 3 weeks, not understanding that things are going to change very soon. When you're sitting there and you're looking at your 6-year-old daughter a month in, 6 weeks into this event, and you, father, mother, haven't been able to provide food for that child for a week and a half, your child's starving to death. What wouldn't you do for food for your child? The people think like, well, I would never do this. And Selko Begovic talks about this a lot. The dark secrets of SHTF survival. Guy that actually lived this. He's like, people all the time say, well, I wouldn't do this violence. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't prostitute myself. I wouldn't do this. But at the end of the day, you don't know what you're capable of in this type of environment. My point is normalcy bias. People have they have this incredible inability to take themselves out of the world that they exist in, where conversations make sense. Nobody's trying to kill you out of every moment of every day, right? And they try and build a plan of action for that world. And this report, I'm trying to get people to think outside of the box. It is a report for military training, and there is some military stuff in there, but there's enough data points that you can pull out there yourself to realize that people are the big threat here. If I can't feed the people in my group, so everyone's building a group, I'm all for building groups, mutual assurance groups, to survive this type of thing. If you get nothing else, if you can't feed everybody in that group, the social cohesion, the rules, however you have it set up, will not survive a week or two past when the food runs out. It will turn into every man for himself. People think that we've evolved past the caveman days and we've evolved as a society and we've got law and order and we're going to stick to. No, well, we're all just we're one catastrophe away from being cavemen and Vikings.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of people, part of the problem is in our society, they've never succumbed to what I call mortal thirst or mortal hunger or mortal security threats. You know, there might be some people who live in the bottom rungs of like the worst derelict urban environments. They might have to deal with these security threats on an ongoing basis, so they know what it's like to have that survival instinct. But most people, like you're saying, and you made a good example with the zombie shows, is that they presume that the threats are going to be like these one-dimensional people who don't think, but they're not kind of playing the tape through far enough to realize how imaginative and creative people are going to be in their schemes to try to get whatever it is you have, especially when it comes down to survival. They just presume everybody's going to be some idiot who, runs through the door into your shotgun. Right. Whereas, these people are going to be very crafty and they're going to be very, creative in terms of how they try to, because it's going to be a life or death situation. They're going to be willing to potentially sacrifice themselves because if they don't, then they're not going to get any food. So it's not going to be that they're probably going to try to steal. I've always thought that thievery is going to be one of the primary risks because most people are going to avoid confrontation until they actually absolutely have to. But yeah, thievery is going to be a big problem. And but you're very right. And we talk a lot about these things on this channel, but it's nice to hear, a person like yourself kind of bring it all together and just paint the picture. In terms of the starvation thing, you've done you've obviously studied the Holodomor, and at what point do you think, and I've done videos on this before, cannibalism is where we're going here, because a lot of people, I've always speculated that because we've become so accustomed to eating meat in this society, and this is something which was a luxury, for many generations. To have meat, was not always something that was readily available. Like you had to actually go out and hunt. Well, the deer, the animals, they still have their wits about them, right? And they're going to be hard to hunt. What's going to be easy to hunt is going to be human beings. And as grotesque and deplorable as it might sound, and as it might be for a person to wrap their head around, I do actually think, because this is one of these fantasy post-apocalyptic things that people, I think we sensationalize it, but we don't really believe it could happen because we believe like we're not cavemen, we're civilized and all this stuff. But history shows us that not only will it happen, I actually think it will happen much more than people realize, especially in like urban environments. And once you get a taste of that, you know, once you go down that road, I think you just become that, you know. But I mean, we're getting off into the weeds here. But
no, it's okay. I'll answer. There is a hierarchy to violence. So the first thing we were talking about was stealing. So yes, people are going to beg and plead first. They will steal second. They will try and take by physical force without killing third, and then they will kill you eventually. If their kids are starving, and the difference between life or death, if they think, or they'll probably think they know, but if they think you have food, they can save their kid's life. The average blue collar person is going. It's just humanity. It's seen throughout all world history. So there is a hierarchy to violence that will come about, and I would say the same thing about the starvation side of it. So. You mentioned deer. I think a lot of people have this plan. I mean, there's this lone wolf mentality. Legend of Mick Dodge. They're going to run out and live off the national forest and run around the woods, and you know, like the Legend of Mick Dodge. It's just, it's clown shoes silly. 99% of the people that claim this, I would say 99.5, don't have the life skills to actually do it in normal times. But even if they, you know, you could convince me, you know, that you had the background to actually pull this off. What you can't convince me of is the other 99% of the people that don't have the life skills running around the same patch of woods that you're running around. At some point, you're gonna have to build a fire for warmth, or to cook food, or to boil water. At some point, you're gonna have to go out to hunt. It just takes one guy in a tree stand from 100 yards away to see you walking around the mountains with a pack on, and they're going to shoot you because they don't have your life skills. Remember, they're dying. So they're going to shoot you without thought to see what's in your pack, without even knowing whether you have food or not. So the next point I would make is that we have hunting seasons for a reason in our countries. There's seasons, and they're typically, you know, and where I'm from, it's 2 days buck and 2 weeks for doe. So
yeah.
Now, and nobody's starving. So you have a situation where every country boy's got a pappy's deer rifle or shotgun, and they're starving to death. My prediction is after about 3 to 4 weeks, you're not going to see a brown thing moving in the woods. Yeah, I mean, you're going to be lucky. You're going to have to. Well, you're in Canada, so maybe if you hiked up to the very, very tippy top where nobody exists, you might find something. But in most areas where there's just even general population, you're not going to find a squirrel. Everything is going to be eaten down to the last. So that gets you to the point of cannibalism. So I think cannibalism is not going to be as this is my belief, is not going to be as prevalent as a lot of the movies want to make it out to be, because it's a sensational topic. I think just the human psyche, the idea of eating another human being is, man, that confirms you're an animal at that point. You know what I'm saying? Like, in your mind, you have to make all these crazy life decisions over time. You've had to kill 3 people to protect your family. You've had to kill somebody to get food for your family. Not justifying, I'm just saying there's going to be all these realities lines that you had to cross in life that you never experienced before, right? And you're going to think very poorly of yourself, unless you're a psychopath, but you're going to think very poorly of yourself to begin with. But that's kind of like the final straw. When you start eating people, at that point, you've kind of just cashed that check and you've just embraced it, right? But I don't think
I will just interject there, because I will say that we're living in a very secular society right now. And I think that in a religiously charged society, there may be more of a reluctance there to take that step. But when we objectify life, and when everybody's got 15 different identities, and there's nothing that's true and there's nothing that's real, I almost think we could potentially slide into that easier.
So my answer is yes.
100%
secular societies, because human relativistic, they're not, the person isn't tied to a soul. They're just, an atheistic Vikings, the different cultures throughout history, the respective humankind, correct, is different. So I agree with that. I still think it's going to be a last result. So what's my understanding of this is history. Again, I've got probably 24 historical books on all these famines. And we're talking about groups of people that had life skills we don't even dream about. They had social cohesion in their villages that we only dream about. They had the ability to scavenge that we only dream about, knowing what kind of bark they could eat. There's stories of these Chinese entire villages eating a certain type of mud. You know what I mean? To stay alive. Yeah. So what we do see is when people reach a certain point, cannibalism does enter the fact. A great book on this subject, in my opinion, probably one of the best deep dive firsthand account studies is Ann Applebaum's Red Famine book. I think it's chapter 11. One of the chapters is really on the starvation, firsthand accounts, and you'll see there. I mean, there are people eating their own kids. There are people eating their neighbors' kids. The psychological toll that starvation. That's what I really want to push is the psychological toll on the human psyche, that starvation, desperation, not knowing whether you're going to live or die, watching family members die, having family members out of town that you haven't seen for a month. They're probably dead. The psychological toll of this violence and death and mayhem is going to play on people. You don't know what you're capable of. 2 books I would recommend: Philip Zimbardo, The Lucifer Effect, How Good People Turn Evil. This idea today, we're talking human relativistic, morally relativistic, everybody has their own truth. Everybody decides what's right and wrong for them. People are capable of very heinous things. That book studies how, somebody that run a Nazi concentration camp, they find him 15 years later. He's a father, family of 4, pinnacle of his community, working a 9-to-5 job, right? How the human brain has the ability to do horrific evil to another human. It's just, we just haven't evolved past the Viking days. It's just this very thin facade of food, legal system, not wanting to get arrested. And this is weird stuff to talk about, but from time to time I bring up, just look at, if you do the research on, porn habits online, the dark, horrific nature of a lot of these men that are looking at this stuff, right? The reason they don't act on a lot of this stuff is because they don't want to spend their life in jail. They've got a family, or they've got a livelihood, and they've got a job, and they don't want to go to jail or get put to death, right? But you take out any veneer of law and order, you're going to see, again, Selko Begovic was the second book, Dark Secrets of SHTF. He lived in some modern time. You hinted about warlords getting really good. He hinted how it went, kind of street by street, the fighting. Then it was down to kin by kin. At some point, you had to almost attach yourself to one of the warlords in the city that kind of arose out of that. If you weren't an emergency room doctor, you had to do whatever they told you to do to get food, right? So violence, using old people as human shields. I mean, the levels of atrocity that humans are capable of doing against each other just within the first year, right, is just something that, again, this sounds like this is some kind of like dark, sadistic sci-fi movie, but it is reality. Read history. Read that again. Download that free report, Grid Down Death of a Nation. It's 122 pages. It's on the psychology and the physiology of human desperation of starvation, how it affects people. There's historical data in there. There's some information from the military training as well. But you can download it for free at emptaskforce.us or griddownconsulting.com and share that far and wide after you read it. I'm going to tell you right now, it's difficult to read. Some of these firsthand accounts are horrific to read, what people went through back in the historical times that have gone through serious famines. But you made a great point. No one in this country has ever, I shouldn't say no one, but even the poorest among the poor in our country, they can walk into a church or a mosque and get food. The welfare office, I mean, there are people that live under bridges for whatever psychological or drug addiction reasons or whatever reasons they're under there for. But I'd struggle to find anybody that hasn't had a single morsel of food in a week in this country. Yeah. It's hard to die.
It's almost impossible to die. The system will keep you alive, even if you make the worst lifestyle choices. And so long as there's this surplus in resource and game theory and the big game of musical chairs doesn't kick in, then it all appears as though, human beings have graduated beyond our inner mammalian or primal lizard brains, but that's still there. It's just been concealed by the abundance. But right when there's a shortage, that's when things get interesting, right? And then if that shortage becomes severe enough, the shorter, like the less resource, it's just game theory. It's, there's going to be a conflict for resources when resources become scarce and people start to fight over things. It's not rocket science. It's pretty basic psychology, but we just presume that we're all going to work together cooperatively till the bitter end and we'll all just wither away together. But it's going to be a much more dangerous situation, which is why we always try to, every day I'm driving the point home, like prepping is just insurance. This is nothing that I don't look at my watch every 10 minutes and wonder when the bombs are going to come in. I enjoy my life, but at the same time, we need to really appreciate the situation that exists in the world today, where you have 8 billion people. We're all relying on electricity. And that's really, and it's all due to our ability to harvest energy at scale and have this very elaborate agricultural system that sustains human life. Once that electricity goes away.
You said the word insurance. You're the first person in the preparedness community. That's how I pitch what I do and what, the service I offer and, the information. I tell people to look at this as an insurance policy. Yep. Because I would think about it. If you don't have home insurance, if you don't have car insurance, if you don't have health insurance or dental insurance, if you don't have people put insurance on their electronics, if you don't have insurances for these different things, people look at you like you're stupid and you're irresponsible. But the idea of having like some food insurance, like having a fallback location out of the city you live in to go to and to have food and supplies and the ability to live away from people, that's considered crazy by our culture, which is weird because like that's human history for 2,000 years up till, the last 60 or 70 years, having a large larder or pantry or, cupboard and keeping things stocked. And, I have a video on how like just rotating the food you already eat. Like if you just buy bulk, like SpaghettiOs, for instance, my kids eat like probably on average a can of SpaghettiOs a week, right? So if cans of SpaghettiOs last for 2 years and they eat 50 cans a year, there's no reason why, a person shouldn't have 100 cans of SpaghettiOs that you cycle through that you buy when they go on 50% off that you resupply. If you kept a large pantry like this with everything that most Americans have, like 10 meals that they cycle to 10 to 15 normal things, and you go through all the ingredients. If you stocked up, you could have 2 to 3 months of food in your home location without spending $1 on long-term food. My point is basic humanity, basic storing up for a rainy day. There's just nobody does that because we have just-in-time delivery. Everybody they're so accustomed to flipping a light and the light comes on, turning on the faucet. You have purified water that's not going to make you sick or kill you. If you need food, you go down to the store. Like the idea of putting things away for a rainy day is just so foreign to the human psyche. So I tell people to treat it kind of like an insurance policy. And I think this would be a good point here. We've been talking about a lot of dark stuff, right? This is a dark subject that we're talking about. And my philosophy is I could come on here and give you a 5-step program and pat you on the back and say, yeah, you can live in that apartment complex. Just put some cases of water under your bed and a couple cases of MREs. You're going to be just fine, 6 months into this event in your apartment building in downtown Toronto or Atlanta or wherever you live. I would rather give people the harsh truth, right? Tell people the truth and let them develop a plan based on the information. I don't want to give people an easy out. Does that make sense? But at the same time, so the point of this is you can't operate your preparedness in fear. That's not life. I tell people all the time, don't. A lot of the preparedness community, they will find something scary or they'll find an event, whether it be a future pandemic, the polar caps reversing. There's just a comet strike. People find this, super volcano, latch onto this, and then just run out and start buying this, buying that, and spending money because out of fear. So I say don't operate your preparedness out of fear, right? But use common sense. Educate yourself on the threats, and do what you can in the natural. So my company motto at Grid Down Consulting is prepare for the worst, hope for the best, let God do the rest, right? So do what's in the natural. Don't let this, I'm in this fear. I think I've done 12 podcasts in the last like 3 weeks, right? I talk about this stuff a lot. I get reports daily as the, deputy director at the U.S. task force, EMP task force there. I'm the happiest guy alive. Anybody that knows me outside of what I do, I have a wonderful family. We've married 25 years. I've got 3 kids, 11, 7, and a 6-month-old. We homestead. We homeschool. We got a great church family. I'm a happy guy. So just because these events are facing us, don't ignore reality. Don't ignore the fact that this life that you're living today is always going to be like this. We haven't even dipped into cyber attacks and quantum computing, and there's multiple scenarios, pandemics that could change. I'm surprised if you look at the whole something serious, more serious, I should say, hasn't happened yet. So we're kind of living on borrowed time. We look at the solar flare threat. The last one was a Carrington event in 1859. We know by ice records and tree ring records in Japan, we know that these serious solar flare CME events happen like every 50, 75. We're way living on borrowed time from a big solar flare hitting us. So there's a lot of threats to your way of life, but you can't operate in fear. And your best defense against that fear is knowledge. More than any amount of money. I mean, I've got clients with $20 million invested in thousands of acres and millions of dollars in infrastructure and food and stuff that we've worked on. But the best thing that you can have is your mental fortitude and understanding. I can't stress enough. You need to understand what's coming so you're not taken off guard. You need to understand the threats that are coming. So I was talking about people operate, the preparedness community is real big on making these scary videos and then, hey, buy this product of mine, buy this food plan, buy this, do that. My philosophy is okay, if you're listening to this, you're very concerned, don't just run out tomorrow and start just shotgun approach on, I need to buy this and this is this. Take some time, read history, read my report that I mentioned, dig into this, find out what the best plan of action for you is. Because if your first step is to go to YouTube, you're going to find an expert that's going to tell you what you want to hear. You're going to find because everybody's an expert based on the amount of followers they have. There's so many people in the preparedness community that have big followings that are telling people information I think that's going to get them killed, because it's easier to give people want to hear that, and it'll get them more likes as opposed to telling them, hey, that idea to live in that apartment complex with bottled water and MREs probably isn't a good idea. People don't want to hear that. So, and the alternatives of, well, what can I do? The alternatives that I put forward in like my book, Survival Theory 2, they're difficult. They're not easy. They're not going to give you a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling. I'm kind of rambling here, but my point is that I think it's more important to be truthful and paint a true picture and make people make their own decisions based on that information, as opposed to telling them what they want to hear.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of avenues into preparedness, and most people are going to start at that level, right, where they are maybe in the city and they're working a 9-to-5 job and their resources are limited, and going off grid is not immediately in the cards. And so
right.
I would
live
say
in the city to make money. Yep.
Yeah, I would say that, for a lot of people, you got to kind of start where you're at, and whatever keeps you motivated. I'm 100% agreement that fear is fast fuel, but it runs out very quickly also. So that a person should, not view this as, view it for what it is. It's likely an inevitable outcome that you're going to have to prepare for. It doesn't mean you sacrifice, the rest of your life and everything you love to do, and you annoy your neighbors and all your family members constantly talking about the end of the world. It just means that, that there has to be an element of fear, because fear is like one of the cornerstone survival instincts. It's the first thing that we need to survive is a fear of the unknown. But at the same time, in order for it to have staying power, there also has to be kind of like a passion for living off grid and just enjoying the simplicity of the lifestyle. And I think there's also a certain gratitude that comes with preparedness, and the stigma that exists within society right now that makes, oh, you're a prepper, oh, you must be one of those crazy people, right? There's almost a certain lack of gratitude that accompanies that for the grid. Like, people like that do not appreciate how good we actually have it. And I've always thought that, preppers, we actually appreciate the fragility of things. That is why we're so scared of losing it, right? Because if you're just one of these people who thinks that, this is just God-given and, it's always going to be this way, we're always going to have abundance, you don't truly appreciate the water coming through the taps. You don't truly appreciate the electricity.
Exactly.
So, it's just...
So true.
Yeah, so I think that, fear it's a good start, but it's definitely not something that, because I get a lot of people like that who will come on the channel and they'll be very afraid, and then they'll be like, oh, well, nothing's happened. And then, so they'll just kind of go back into whatever they were doing before and not understand that this is a long-term process. So yeah, start at the bug out bag. Start putting MREs under your bed, but know that if you want to survive for a long term, once you kind of take this foray into prepping, you're going to discover that everything we're talking about today, it's not going to be easy to survive the worst of worst case scenarios, which I think is really only a matter of time. We can, I could make some optimistic arguments as to why maybe it won't happen for 100 years. But I think it's very likely that it will eventually happen at some point. Will it happen in our life? I don't know for sure. It's starting to look like it will. But, I think we're in agreement there. So where...
So this
go ahead.
This is a common kind of philosophy I see from a lot of the channels online is kind of considered incremental prepping, right? Hey, don't worry about that big scary, EMP scenario. Start out with prepping for a tornado, right? Like 3 days, then, graduate to 7 days. Because I'll be blunt, the idea of surviving a long-term grid down a collapse, like if you wanted to have a fully, it's very expensive. It's cost prohibitive for the average person, the average blue collar person. So yeah. I get that. But the answer to that is kind of not to ignore it if you know that the threat is sincere and it's something that you could see in your lifetime, and I believe it will be. Just because of the amount of information I have to deal with on daily, I believe this is something that's going to be in our lifetime. So, as far as the incremental prepping thing, yes, that's what I'm saying. Hey, this is a serious thing. This is going to take massive amounts of, stuff to survive, and oh my goodness, it's overwhelming. I don't even know where to start. So a lot of people say the answer to that is just prepare for 3 days. I would take a different approach. I would say, hey, I am going to look at this long-term event that's likely. It's not something like, we're not talking about aliens coming or some off-the-wall thing. Like, this is something that legitimately I can wrap my hands around. I can read the reports. I can see this is a likely thing to happen in my lifetime. So it's not something weird, right? And I'm going to have my brain there, right? Does that make sense? But then incrementally, like you said, yeah, the first step is getting some water and some MREs, right? Or some buckets of rice, and incrementally building towards that. But my fear is a lot of people, if you just take only the incremental road, and 3 days, I'm going to start thinking about a week next, and then an event happens next week, and that's all your brain's wrapped around, and you've never studied this over here, and you've never thought about what happens here or what happens there, you're going to make decisions based off that 2-week event that you've always had your brain wrapped around that may not be best in this scenario. Does that make sense? So I'm not talking about the speed of your, because everybody has a different financial abilities and geographic regions. So yes, not everybody can live off grid. I mean, most people have to live in the city to have a job. I get this. So I'm saying, like, don't get overwhelmed at the idea and think like, well, I have to have, nobody's ever going to be fully there, right? It's always going to be an incremental process. The prepping never ends. But does that make sense? Like, wrap your brain around this. At least have an answer for this, even if it's a plan C or plan X or Y. Don't ignore this just to focus on this. Does that make sense? What are your thoughts on that, Nate?
Well, I think that it could even be a coping strategy that a lot of people have, wherein they don't maybe want to look at that, but they want to. Maybe they have this occlusion where they try to block it out, but they feel as though they're taking a step anyways. I think one of the arguments for the approach that you're proposing is that if you have this grand view of where you want to end up, where let's say it's in an off-grid homestead, then you can kind of plan your life accordingly towards that end, make the right financial decisions that you might have to make in terms of long-term. I think what happens with some people, I would say, that might be a testament to what you're saying, is that maybe they focus too much on what I call micro preparedness, which is like a hyperfixation on the short term, the bug out bag, the meso style prepping where you're just preparing to ride out a short-term event, and they hyperfixate on that, and they go deep into like the most expensive gadgets instead of saving up for the piece of land. So it can come at the cost of the big picture, and that's where I would say, I can agree with what you're saying. But I think at this point in time, I'm just trying to motivate as many people as I can to take that first step. And hopefully they'll stumble into conversations like this where we'll get them thinking about, the worst case scenarios that could potentially come and would require a lot more commitment. But there's two ways of going about this. I mean, I'm personally not going to throw shade on anybody who's just kind of, trying to do something, but I can see, I think the idea of FEMA saying, hey, you guys need like a 3-day food supply, I think it's laughable, Like I think that, I can get what you're saying there with that, in that it misleads people about the potential. If you're just thinking that it's only going to be 2 weeks and that's the kind of mindset that you've prepared for, then there's going to be a rude awakening when 2 weeks goes by and there's still no lights on. So
everything's been broken down into top 5 this, 10 step this, and so
it's gritty, man.
People have asked me,
it's dark.
Yeah, people have asked me like, why don't you do that with your survival retreat stuff? And well, because every client that I have has different geographic location in the country, so their group size, their financial abilities, their mobility, there's 100 factors for each family that I've worked with in the past. That's different. You can't bottle this up. That's kind of what I was saying is if you can paint this future world that you want, you have to paint the world. Any general that's going to enter a battlefield, enter a battle, he wants every piece of information from that battlefield. He wants to know the troop count, the weapons, the day, night, weather. I mean, he wants all this information before he builds his plan of action. That's kind of what I'm getting at, is like get the more mental aspect, get the picture that you want to do. And then, this is a difficult thing to survive. And like you said, work your way into it, right? You don't have to fix it tomorrow. But again, I would rather be in a position,
have the vision,
as a person that has that is making this long-term plan. And I haven't got there yet. You know what I mean? And maybe I have less stuff than somebody that's only focused on the here and now, or a small event. And they've got all their eggs in one basket in their suburban town and whatever major city, right? And yes, my supplies are in a storage unit, next to my uncle Bob's farm, 2 hours out of town, and I haven't, I've got different things, and I would rather have that mindset, if that makes sense. But you're correct. I mean, there's lots of things. The preparedness is a catch-all phrase for a lot of different ideas, right? There's a lot of different scenarios, some of them more realistic than others. And a lot of it comes down to is what is the likelihood? So people ask me, what's the worst case scenario? I'm like, well, what do you mean? Worst as in the worst, or like most likely, or, what are we talking? What are we talking about here? But it's mindset, survival mentality, looking at history. People ignore a lot of history, these historical starvation. There's a lot to learn from our, prior generations that have gone through this similar types of events. And so in my report, one of the things I do at the end of that historic narrative, I tie 4 things together. I say, if this were to happen, again, we're talking about EMP, solar flare, cyber attack, physical attack, or even a very deadly pandemic, anything that completely shuts everything down, right? The difference today is we don't have the life skills. Okay, we talked about that. Just our generation today just does not have the life skills to live without electricity. We don't have the horse-drawn plows we can run out and buy. There's no general store to buy a 50-pound bag of salt. Just the infrastructures. It's a continental time machine without the general store infrastructure around to get the things to live without electricity, if that makes sense. And we look at the life skills of the people that live through these things. What we need to look at is all these historical narratives. I mean, horrific things that happened. They were still rule of law. So I have this starvation, human desperation, rule of law type like conundrum, right? The Chinese famine, the Holodomor. If you were caught stealing food, if you were a farmer, Ukrainian peasant, and you snuck into the town to try and get some food, you were killed on sight. There was still law and order. There were still court systems. There were kangaroo courts, and you would just be hung or put to death. But there was still the threat of legal action. In the case of no law and order, we're looking at the Viking days, and we're also looking at the Bosnia conflicts and Selko Begovic and that whole storyline. They were in a situation with no law and order. There were basically warlords running the town, but they did get occasional food drops. You were able to barter with the warlord that could bring stuff from outside the blockade. So you have these like different like things that are coming around. And my opinion is we're going to have no law and order, no life skills, no resupply, no. You add up all these things, it'll be a biblical scale famine that's never been seen in world history, because all of these things are at the worst, highest levels, and they all come together into one event that has never been seen before. And so, yeah, it's just it's a kind of a frightening thing to ponder.
Yeah, and this is why, I think having a long-term strategy is so important. So if somebody wanted your consulting services, or if they wanted to learn more about you, where is the best place they can go to do that?
So my private website is griddownconsulting.com, and my book. So I have 2 books on the subject: Survival Theory and Survival Theory 2. In Survival Theory 2, the first like 30 to 40% of that book is the psychological report that I was talking about, the physiological and psychological effects of starvation, minus the pictures and the graphs and everything. So I include a lot of that information in the first section of my book, Survival Theory 2. But then so a lot of the preparedness community wanted it to be a binary choice. You either bug out, or you either bug in, or you're going to go wander the open road and live in the woods. Those are you either bug in, bugging out. It's this binary choice. And I believe that there are other things that people without a lot of budget can do. As far as consulting, I only maintain about 6 clients at a time, just because, and there's it's a lot of work to build a survival retreat. I do fly and do analysis of existing groups and retreats. I do a lot of that, actually. So, I mean, that is one thing I do. Griddownconsulting.com is my website. So I have those 2. I also have 3 fiction books aside from Survival Theory and Survival Theory 2. You can download my report for free. It's at on the resources tab, Grid Down Consulting. and emptaskforce.us. You can get that there. Support our fight. So we didn't get a ton into it, but like our organization, the EMP Task Force, the Secure the Grid Coalition, michaelmaybe.org, Tom Popick over at Resilient Societies. There's about 5 organizations of ours. None of us get funding. We're fighting the electric utilities who have unlimited funds, right? We just get clobbered at every turn by the electric utilities and what they have going on. So support these organizations. If you can't support them with financially, support them, volunteer for time, volunteer to help them out. And then last, I would say if you follow me on social media, it's at Grid Down Prepper on Instagram and at Jonathan Hollerman on Twitter and Facebook and Patreon and the other ones.
Excellent. Well, I would strongly encourage people to go and do that. This has been a fascinating conversation. It's always great to hear a fresh perspective on these things, and this is right up my subscribers' alley, so I'm sure they're going to enjoy this. You don't have a YouTube channel yet, do you?
I do.
Oh, you do?
So I don't pour a ton. I've got a video on EMP hardening bug out vehicles, and so I've got videos on there, but I don't focus on it. I'm writing books. I'm working with my clients, and I'm volunteering a lot of my time to help get the government to harden the grid. I'm carrying. I've got too many brands and too many irons and too many fires, and it's just something I haven't had time to dedicate to putting more content. I'd like to. I just don't have the time to, if that makes sense. But I do have a YouTube channel. It's at Jonathan Hollerman. Okay.
Well, we hope to have you back and maybe talk a bit more about current events. That's one thing we didn't really touch on. We talked about, the nature of conflict in general, but maybe we'll bring you back and get some of your thoughts on what exactly is taking shape in the Middle East, in China, and Ukraine, Russia, and how this might all come about, because a lot of people right now seem really interested in just hearing different perspectives on current events, because of course this is a very fluid situation we find ourselves in. We don't know what black swan is going to come tomorrow. So guys, go out there and get a copy of this guy's book, and make sure you blow up his phone with consultation requests. All right. Thanks for coming out, Jonathan. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Nate. Really appreciate it.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.